We'll go from here.
Alright, so, there's like a few things that I guess we've left vague and maybe got like ruined by programming stuff and just things not happening as soon as we decided them or whatever, so we need to talk about them again.
Sure.
And then some stuff we need to define because it's just time to define them more. So, one thing that we kind of left out in the open is whether we want branching dialogue UI that's similar to other branching dialogue UIs, or whether we want to get rid. And I kind of just let the other writers know that it's okay to have it, but I don't even know. Like it, to me, the more I work on the design that we have now, the more it seems like branching dialogue just gets in the way of how the system works.
Um, all right, I'm going to start up a new file in
Okay.
the thoughts folder, and we can edit through it as we go.
Okay.
We'll both be able to type in it, I think. And if not, then I'll just adjust the permissions, and I'm pretty certain that we will. So, um, 15, 15. Oops. So the question was to branch or not to branch.
Dialogue. Yeah.
Um, do you want me to send you the link to this?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I realized that that was probably uh, here you are.
There you
So I was thinking about it, and I think that before we make any permanent decisions, you should play through as much of Planescape as you can stand.
go. Okay.
But I still think it's worth talking about before that happens. You said that there were some slight issues with creating player agency just through the mechanics of the game, and I agree with you. I feel like that's probably pretty difficult and maybe not necessary for every single decision. In fact, probably it's infeasible to make every player decision evolve from the mechanics of the game. I think that um, branching dialogue options don't necessarily need to exist so much as I think that multiple dialogue options should exist that more or less end you up in the same place. Like, for instance, before you enter into a conversation with a character, depending on the choices that you've made thus far, it doesn't really matter what you say. Just like in some situations in life, when you're talking to someone, if they think that you're an asshole beforehand, it doesn't matter how well you come off. It's just not going to change the outcome. Um, and perhaps that's what we can do to make players feel like they have more choice in dialogue, uh, or to make it so that you guys have more leeway with how characters can be represented, playable characters can be represented. The other option, of course, is Fire Emblem style system where you just have characters talking with one another, and the only differences between dialogue are if you unlock additional chapters. I don't think that's probably the correct system to go with. And largely what I'm predicating that decision on is something I was thinking about for the Ritsmith concerning his uh, proclivity to lie.
Hmm.
I think that There's sort of a trope within RPGs, and it's not necessarily a bad trope even. It's just that generally there's an option for you to lie in something like a Fallout, something like an Elder Scrolls series. There will be a lie option, and in many other games there are lie options too. And I thought it would be interesting if the Ritsmith could actually um, alter the course of his narrative by lying more frequently. Like if he consistently chose the lie option, because it will consistently show up. Generally, when you're playing a character, you see that lie option infrequently. But if you saw that option very frequently, in fact, if you saw it more and more frequently, and if you started lying, it became that most all of your answers were lies. I thought that would be pretty interesting, and that's not really afforded by a single choice dialogue system or afforded for lie.
No, I guess not. I mean, the way the minor choice thing is designed is that you could put in a bunch of places where the player has an opportunity to lie anyway, and it has nothing to do with branching dialogue if you so choose it.
Um, Say that again. That last part.
So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it just depends on the way that you want to lie. Like, if all the lies are verbal, then you have to have some kind of branching dialogue system to punch it through. But if the, I mean, part of how the Ritz Smith lies is basically like he just tells what he's thinking, right? Like the Ritz Smith is more of this kind of impulsive liar that doesn't exactly choose to lie. He just lies anyway.
Well, I think it could be both. It wouldn't necessarily have to
Right.
be one or the other.
Yeah. So as the narrative design stands now, you could use minor choices to basically continue to influence him to do what he does best and keep lying impulsively without having to choose to lie necessarily. Like I guess you would know that you're like carrying on the lying tendency, but you wouldn't have to like keep making up the lie or something like that. It wouldn't have to necessarily be in the way of like a branching dialogue system, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, I guess what it comes down to then, if I'm thinking through this, is what are the failure states for a conversation? Are we having conversations in which you can fail,
I
or
don't know. I mean, I've been thinking a little bit about it. I mean, to me, I've almost been avoiding branching conversations just because I think it makes more sense to fail in other parts of the game. But um, maybe it's strange. It's like that part. It's like part of it is like, do we want to make the branching conversation like a game in itself, or do we want to just make it part of an exploration of the character and the world and stuff like that?
but
It's like
isn't
two different games.
isn't that kind of it kind of feels like you're on rails as a player when you don't have any agency over what your character is saying. And that's sort of something that we're encouraging in some ways because we want you to feel like you're operating as a character rather than operating as the player.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't think that a character is always going to say the same thing in the same conversation twice. There'll be times where they wish they could have said another thing. And
Yeah,
if yeah,
and there's the thing with our design is you are on the rails of the design of the character anyway. Like if this were The Walking Dead or something else like that, then the character would be vague enough in which he would have all these different things to say. But if we make a real character, then there's only going to be a certain amount of reactions available to them emotionally in the first place. So it's like, do we want them to seem like bipolar, or do we want to give them
no,
opportunities to open up in strange ways and like
yeah, no,
how much of that? Yeah,
I think
it's
it's
like a
that.
weird continuity frequency thing.
Do we want? Thank you.
So yeah, so I guess that's the other thing with branching dialogue. I still think like that doesn't mean characters can't feel more than one way. I just think that means that we have to understand that way more accurately and play with it maybe more sensitively.
I think that
Um,
we shouldn't. choose for it not to exist. I think that's right now is if we're trying to decide whether branching dialogue should or should not exist, I think it certainly should. I think that we should be sparse with our implementation, or more, I guess,
Well,
discerning with where we employ it.
mm,
Because it doesn't need to be every conversation that you have multiple options. I mean, that's something that ends up taking a lot of time in RPGs generally. It's like you're sitting there and you feel as though you have to go through every conversation option because it exists, and
yeah.
then miss part
I
of the
mean, one of the
story.
questions I think I had was like, do you think, like, with the UI of a conversation, do you think there's like an element of pacing we should have where you have a certain amount of time to respond to characters, or
Interesting.
like there's a time limit? Because like I feel like one of the reasons that The Walking Dead and Telltale Games works with branching dialogue is because you're like not allowed to screw up the actual timing of the game. Like the conversation will carry on whether you're continuing the conversation or not, and will still be a good conversation because of that.
I think there should be a time limit if the dialogue is branching.
Mm.
I don't think there should be a time limit if it isn't branching. And I think that in general, if the decision um, to, you know how in some games there'll be, I'm struggling with how to word this, but in a game like Fallout, for example, you'll talk to a local townie or something, and they'll have like 15 different things that you can ask them about in town. Instead of asking about it and leaving it up to the player to like click through and ask each of the things and find out how much lore they want or how much lore they don't want, we should just condense down the most pertinent things that that character would say into a dialogue that is not interactive from the player's point of view. And so we'd be removing a lot of those, like those NPCs that are kind of just world building NPCs.
Yeah, I'm not very interested in them.
Okay.
I prefer if the most of our speaking roles have something to do with the actual story.
Right.
So yeah, so I agree with that decision.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
So I think I like the time. I really like the idea of having a timer on narrative. Um,
Mm.
I really like it because I want to also, if I can, if it's something that everyone's interested in doing, put timelines on quests, side quests, some of them, so that it feels more like. I guess my best example is in Mass Effect 2. There's this the main quest line. I don't know if you've played ME2 or not.
No, I haven't.
Okay.
I've played
Or,
like half of the first one, and that's it.
okay.
I
Well.
know a lot about them, but
Okay.
yeah.
I'll try not to spoil too much. As I guess keeping in mind that people might be watching as well.
Okay.
But in Mass Effect 2, um, there's this big overplot in which this civilization is going to destroy everything else, and then you have a whole bunch of side missions, and it feels weird for the player to miss out on doing the side missions while there's this big thing that you're like being pressured into attending to. So you usually do the side missions, but then the narrative cohesion of this big pressing plot makes very little sense. Like you have to
Yeah.
suspend your disbelief that you're going on all of these adventures while the rest of the world is in peril.
Yeah, that's a common trope in a lot of games. It's
I
like,
think
oh yeah, something awful is happening, but you might as well get this item. It's gonna take you like 2 hours, but it's worth it.
I think what would be more interesting is if we provide two side quests at a time, two or more side quests, and you can only access, like if we were to give people two choices, they could go to one or they could go to the other. If we gave them three, they
Hmm.
could go to two of them and not go to the last one. And so it'd become clear to the player that they have a choice to make at each of these side quests. And it wouldn't have to be every single side quest that we do this way. But as the narrative progresses and gets to a head, then we start clipping off their decisions. And perhaps it would be
Hmm.
more of
All
that
right.
way for some classes than it would be for others.
Suppose I did. I don't know. It seems like I guess the way I think about it is the issue that you've already brought up is it depends on whether we're trying to keep a sense of urgency or there's not a sense of too much time having to be closed upon in the story.
I
Or if
wonder.
it's exploratory, then there's no distraction from the rest of the story and exploring other things. But if you only have a certain amount of time to defuse the bomb, then it makes no sense to like go off to bomb school and learn how to defuse a bomb first.
Well, I think maybe then we look at the timelines of the story. Like, let's say that in the Cabaretto story, there's a target that she has to get to take care of, and there are two
Mm.
side quests that pop up, and they're on the way to the target town, and it's going to take you however long to get there, to travel there, and both routes are viable. You can go to one or you can go to the other, but you can't go to both.
Okay, wait. So what you're talking about a side quest is not really a side quest. Then it's a branch in the narrative, right?
I suppose so. It's
Okay.
yeah. Sorry, it wouldn't have to be immediately narrative. It wouldn't have to concern the narrative completely. Like
No, no, but I
yeah,
mean, as like if we're talking about narrative design, then the idea of a side quest is that you can go do the quest and then come back to wherever
to
you
the
left
narrative.
off in the story, right?
Well, you wouldn't.
Versus that like
Right.
one of these quests would be almost continuative.
I wonder. I wonder if you wouldn't. Maybe sometimes you don't have to do the quest if you don't want to. Maybe there's
Hmm.
like a
All
more
right.
viable option in the town. I wonder how that would work. I mean, that's all.
Yeah,
Like
I
this.
don't
This
know.
is
I
all
mean, I
stuff.
haven't been
Right.
thinking too much along the side quest thing just because I'm working on the main stuff at the moment, but it's something to think about.
If we're trying to reduce the overall amount of clutter and grinding, I think it's important to link these side quests in the narrative as best we can. Like even if you have a side quest where you're going off on some, like to take Oblivion as an example, there's a quest where you they tell you to go find this guy who's gone missing, and he's a painter. And so you try and find him, and then you go into his house, and it lets you click on the painting. And you click on it, and you enter into the world of the painting, and he's trapped there. So like that's an interesting side quest, or what it was when I was playing it. And I think there's that idea has been done before, but I wasn't aware of it at that point in time. Anyway, you can have a side quest like that that seems like it's more a part of the narrative because it's one of the stops along the way to something that you're trying to get to,
Hmm.
rather than being something that you do that's out of the way that doesn't feel
Right.
like it's connected to your journey.
I think maybe a good place to put these would be during the minor choice events because they already feel like a second story, like a subplot.
Subplot.
Yeah. So like if the player was more interested in the subplot or whatever, that there would be the second story that we could define through side quest, and they could continue to follow the side quest story kind of thing.
Huh. So,
Yeah.
I wonder then how maybe for some quest or so, for some characters it's more pertinent for that to be the case, and for others it's less pertinent.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know how. Like as far as side quests go, I don't really think they're totally necessary right now to our design whatsoever. But if we're going to design for them in mind, or at least have the opportunity to put them in later, then I think we might as well think about them in that way because it's easier than going into the larger branching parts and kind of fucking shit up there. The only other place we could do it is events that don't change, like fixed points, which, at least as the design stands now, most things would have some fixed points. So we could put stuff in there too.
Huh.
Or I mean, it's the more impossible version. But if we had more attention and energy and were geniuses, we could make choice specific side plots where depending on which branch that you chose, you have a side plot or side quest that's only accessible because you chose to go to plot A versus plot B or plot C.
What I'm thinking is that it certainly increases the replayability of the character, the specific character that you're playing as.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's a positive thing given the systems that we're using to encourage players, incentivize them to play through other classes.
I mean, I think it's good if we have time to do it. Anyway, I think we need to talk about like three other things.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
And we only have like a half an hour, so
Okay. So
let's
what's
leave
next?
that for another day. Yeah. Okay, so point and click stuff in general. Because you once brought up point and click concept, but there was
On
never a final
in the
decree
towns?
on it. And just in general, I don't know. It was like during the more UI phase of development like a month ago. But yeah, in towns, I suppose.
That's going to be something that we discuss this evening
Okay.
with the
Then
rest of the group.
I'll leave that. I'll leave that for them then. And then let's see. There was also so one of the discrepancies that we made is that the minor choices could have their own UI and they would feel choicey, and that the reason we wanted agency choice to be part of the big ones was so it felt fluent and natural and I don't know, like kind of clean, I guess. Like it didn't break up with the phase of the game. Versus once you were in the game, kind of like meta things like UI were already already part of the continuity of your play session and wouldn't break up anything.
Right.
So with that in mind, I guess the UIs depend on what the choice of agency can be. So right now the only choice of agencies we can have are fighting and maybe talking. I guess we decided on talking, right?
Well,
At least in some ways.
yeah, I think that we'll definitely have um, more open dialogue system, or at least that's what we were discussing earlier. But part of the reason I brought up having quest lines on the way to a town is that moving is also a form of agency for the player.
Yeah,
So
right. It's hard to align a specific choice other than going to a place
going
to
to a
that
place.
scene of agency.
Um, well, I think it's about information, really. Does the player have information about what's going to happen in those areas before they make the choice to move? Because then that's
Right.
player agency. If they don't know
Right.
what's going to happen in those areas, then it's not really any choice whatsoever. It's just, I roll the dice. Is this more interesting than the other thing was?
Yeah, there lies one of the central problems with the big choice at the beginning is they only have so much information.
We don't,
So
yeah,
the
we,
fighting becomes like the better option of the two.
we don't have to. I mean, okay, so here are the representations of fighting that I've gone
Yeah.
through since we started talking about this. The first would be you're in battle with someone, and then there's this cliche trope of do you kill the person or don't you?
Right.
Which we could do in an interesting way if we wanted to, but largely it all comes back to do you kill the villain now or do you let them screw you over later? And that's more of a
So
moralistic good versus evil thing.
yeah.
Um, the second way in which that could be represented is you make decisions which turn your NPC against you. Do you choose to kill them when they try and abandon the party, or do you choose to let them go and it's the same thing? And that's something that could pop up again and again and again. And if we were lazy, that's something we'd go after. The other thing that we could do is we could make it so that in the set piece battles, I think I came up with some sort of example for that before, where maybe you're defending a town and you've got trebuchets in the back and there's someone assaulting it, something like that. Um,
Hmm.
in one of those set piece battles, um, which characters do you send to which part of the town to hold like a separate section, for instance, knowing
Hmm.
that if those characters die in this battle, they're dead for the rest of the narrative. So maybe that's an interesting way of handling player death and consequence and agency. Do you let that side of the town get overrun and possibly miss out on uh, a quest line or items or some sort of narrative resolution that you wanted to see? Or do you keep your party safe? And that's encouraging the player to make decisions that have combat implication and narrative implication and unite the two.
Hmm. All right.
So that's a choice
Uh,
of player agency. through um, through combat.
Yeah.
Um,
It's just like I think some of the things I'm struggling with is it's hard to not make that seem more on rails than it would be off rails.
uh,
Like it,
how so?
because it will feel awfully set up to have the characters go, "Oh no, this is happening," or "This needs to happen," and
Then
so
you
like
tell the player beforehand. This is a siege that you
there's a very
probably
visible
can't
well
win. Sorry, go ahead.
sequence you can't win.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, it's like you tell them you're letting them know ahead of time, like maybe one quest line ahead or one quest ahead of time, basically, that there's an army mounting up somewhere and they're very likely to invade X or Y, and then you have two paths you could go on. You could completely avoid the town and let it fall, or you give the player the chance to maybe try and go and defend it. And then when they go to defend it, you make good on that promise. This is something that you can't possibly hold here. You're going to have to send parts of your party to go and hold the other side, or you can abandon the main gate to the soldiers and see how that goes. And there'll be different repercussions in different parts of the town depending. And our town system actually allows for that quite nicely. Because
okay.
if one whole section of a town is destroyed, we can represent that very easily.
Hmm.
Um, if a whole
So
town, sure.
wouldn't this end up being a visible choice UI then? I guess is what I'm saying, or is it that when you're outside on the open map that you have the ability to send different party members to parts of the map in the first place?
You're probably in combat and you're fighting, and then some dialogue would pop up on the screen, like a soldier after like the first wave comes through and you have a few more waves left, something,
Hmm.
saying that another side of the town is falling, and then you have a choice to send your other guys off to try and fight that. And
Okay.
maybe what
So
happened,
it
yeah,
ends up being a separate choice anyway. It's still its own like choice UI. It's outside of the game fighting mechanic. Like the thing we're going for is that like the choice is seamless because there's no like open menu. That the real choice is that like you kill this person or kill this person, and that unlike other fights in the game, that the person just doesn't die, but the death equals some kind of ripple throughout the rest of the world that changes the rest of the play. Right?
um,
I feel like that's the thing. But like it would be lame to make everything just like, do you kill this person or not, or do you heal this person or not? The story would have to start the same way.
I think it feels as though it's not. I see what you mean. It's not like
Yeah.
it feels like a better form of player choice than just making it dialogue related that way. Me at least. To have it pop up
Mm.
as a separate part of choice, to have it happen during combat, even if it does have some dialogue that say you should go send these people to this place. I mean, technically, we could do it the other way, where you're not fighting in battle, and there's no part where you feel like you're overcoming the enemy, and then the player's expectations are um, subverted. Uh,
Okay. I have a thing to proposition to you. We only have like 10 minutes left, but
no,
so
we've got
I had
until
a concept that like snuck in a player choice of agency into the fight mechanics, but it would like my only problem with it is that it seems to require the player to know they need to do it, so there would be like some propping of the player, but feel like it would still work where basically in order to make your choice you would have to give an item to an enemy. Like that's the action that would have to take place. So, but like I feel like the issue with that is nothing. Like the fight could go on forever, and then the player could not get it, and and it could just keep going and going and going, and they would just never get that they had to give that item to a character unless we like made it so bleedingly obvious that no one would fuck it up. So like the I guess the issue is that we would have to like make a great line of dialogue or something to always fool them into doing like one specific action.
we've got until 5:30. Firstly,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
I didn't know. I forgot.
That's okay. Secondly, I think that the way you would represent that is you have an enemy that steals items that you have equipped, and you know that they're going after a certain item. So you have one of the characters in your party equip that item, and then you could move them up to the front row because this person's got melee range or something. And the condition for having the reinforcements stop being sent in to aid against this bandit or whatever is to have them steal that item from that character.
Hmm.
If that makes sense.
It does, but I think the actual moment of the player doing something would be him giving or him or her giving the item to somebody else, not like being stolen from, I guess.
So you want something that's like a voluntary.
Right. Well,
I,
otherwise it doesn't feel like it's actually the choice of the player. Not really. I don't think.
well, maybe the encounter is more. Well, I don't know. I can see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I wonder how we'd represent that. Um,
Because I like there's like just the corny. It feels corny, but maybe there's a way we can make it good in which like there's just lines of dialogue that goes, "You have to do this," or "I've got to do this," or "I'll go insane," or whatever, and then the character's like, "Oh, okay, I need to figure out what to do with this thing." But that it feels like tutorializy, and then it only kind of feels like a choice because you know you're supposed to do it. But it's also a game, so people always know that they're supposed to do things a certain way. So maybe there's like a subtle way in which we can do it in which it doesn't feel so awful. I'm not sure. I feel like we need playtesters.
we
I
have
feel like it's
we have
probably
playtesters. We just don't have our engine yet.
we don't have anything to playtest. How about this? I'll write in that concept for now, and then as soon as we have a build, we will test it and see what happens. Is that good?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm trying to think about that. How you would. I think that there is a way to make choice revolve around buying or selling items. Because that's a system within the game that's going to exist, and it's something that we could make choice revolve around. Like in I don't know if you've played The Wolf Among Us yet.
Yeah, I play it.
In The Wolf Among Us, there's a choice where um, you can give someone $50, and then later on it kind of bites you if you did.
Yeah, yeah. It's like this. It's this weird, almost no choice until you realize it's like a choice the game made for you, pretty much.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, you didn't have to
In a
give
weird way. Yeah.
you didn't have to give the $50. You could have said you didn't, and then you could give it later, and like it kind of matters. But I think that maybe another way is that a player's going to become very invested in their resources, especially their gold. But as subsequent playthroughs go through, you'll need gold less because you'll have more items to pick from that you've already finished games with. Um, and so if we maybe have storylines in which, like, let's say the goblin storylines, they're obviously going to come across less gold average than, or I wouldn't say obviously, but they could hypothetically come across less gold average than humans could.
Yeah.
Um, and so what might be interesting is if you have it so that there's a quest line that has a buy-in, and you know that it's going to have a buy-in, you just don't know what the total is for that buy-in. And so there will be multiple sort of choices for you. You could either sell gear until you have enough money, or you could go steal from someone. So a quest line evolves from that choice.
Hmm. All right. Yeah. I don't know. It's like it's a. The problem is the character I'm writing it for has is not in any like economic disparity.
Right, I'm
It's
just
more of
saying
a
for later.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I it's a good way to do it.
Uh,
But yeah, all right. I'll think about it. I'll try and write it in as best as I can figure it out for the moment. And then I think the last thing that I have that I remember that we talked about last time we talked about this is that there would just like every once in a while, if we had the resources, we should write in just a special choice that like is a surprise for everyone, just to have fun.
like
Are you still okay with that?
what
Like
kind of
just Well, like just flying a kite on the beach with a friend or something. Like just a choice that may or may not matter, but it's just something that you don't usually get to do in the rest of the game. And it is, I don't know, it's a play option basically.
I think that it should be weighted against something important
Okay.
because the action in and of itself is not. It's not important to your character's overall progression experientially, which might even factor in because you might be
Yeah.
under leveled for the next encounter or something. It's not important experientially. It's not important in terms of overall progression, but maybe it's something like you have one NPC whom you're really close friends with or something, and they've been around since level one, way back in the day,
Yeah.
and they've been traveling with you. And
I think it's also like it's a concept of pacing. Like I feel like at the very beginning of a game you're still learning everything and so things are naturally slow and then by mid game like things are going to be way more fighting. And
right,
so like you get into this thing where it's all fighting and it's all quick actions. And then if you want to slow things down, you either have to like shove a bunch of story into your game or shove a bunch of something into the game to slow things down or you can like include the option of slowing things down just for the enjoyment of the player if they
I th-
so choose it.
I think that that's that's salient. And what we should do is we should attach a reward to it, not just that it happens. I think that it's great that it does, but also that it somehow impacts whichever character you're sharing the moment with.
Yeah,
And so,
there's yeah, like the best example I can think of is I don't know, people really loved it when it happened, I guess, but I didn't think it was that ingenious, but it was fun. Was the there's some bar you can go to in Bioshock Infinite where there's just someone playing a beautiful song on the acoustic guitar. Or
mhm,
wait, your player and Elizabeth play a song together on the guitar in the bottom of a bar for no reason other than they're sad and lonely, pretty much.
sure, but you aren't giving
Yeah.
up anything to do that.
No, not at
It's just
all.
a
It's
pace
just
breaking.
available.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I like that moment. I think that with the system that we're now leaning toward, or at least the one that I'm leaning toward, I don't know if you're completely sold on it yet. That if we're going to encourage player choice, we need to make them feel like their options are important. The options that they choose to neglect are important in some way. And maybe what we can do is make it so that these side quests that go on in these individual towns, wherever they are not class specific. We could have some that are, but we could have some that aren't. So that if you don't go to them, you might still be able to get to them in another game. And then we can or in another character. And so then we can reuse quest lines in a way.
Hmm. I think that has to be involved in the map, the map town
Right.
discussion too, because that sounds. What I think you're also saying is that it's somehow tied to geography, and because they're
It
all
is.
traveling in the same place, that they could visit wherever the quest is, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So
Right.
yeah. So I guess that's probably part of however that discussion goes. But I think it's a kind of good idea. Um, it would be fun to play with.
Good. All right.
All right.
So
I think that answers most of my questions.
okay.
Dang. Did
Do
I even answer it? Yeah, I
do you,
think.
do
Wait, did we come? No, I
no.
don't think we actually answered the question. I think we just talked about
Which
it.
one?
This last one. Like the special option
I think it's
face
worth doing.
breaking thing.
Yeah,
Okay,
for
alright.
sure. I think we should include it. I just think that it should have some sort of impact, and that I think maybe now we need to discuss what kind of impact NPC characters will have
Okay.
on
I mean, as far as my
our
story goes,
NPCs.
it doesn't seem like there will be a huge impact from NPCs. If this seems to like the way Lost Rider's going, is that there's no way that NPCs won't have an impact. I don't know. So I guess
Really?
it's
For Lost Rider?
yeah. I mean, it seems like no matter what happens, the NPCs will have like tremendous impact
Yeah.
on everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess it depends on the class. I don't know. but to me, like as far as I'm writing right now, Cavalier's story seems a bit like a lone wolf guy. Like it seems like most of his NPC interactions are a bit spontaneous.
I mean, NPC
Um,
allies.
oh, okay, allies. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's something we've talked on and off about, but I feel like there's like a lot of stuff we could. I don't know. It's to me like last time we talked about it, it was still the we don't have a build yet. We don't really know kind of thing, and I still kind of feel that way.
It should still, like, regardless of build, even if we're talking about them outside of combat, we're not
Yeah.
talking about them as specific characters, but rather as a device to examine the character that you're playing,
Yeah.
like an
Okay.
alternative lens. That's something we talked about with the Cabaretto the other day.
Yeah.
Um, if we're including those for that reason, then these special occasions or these moments in which you're going out and you're doing something non-quest related with an NPC ally, which is what I think it should be,
Mm.
um, then what exactly is that doing for you as a player? What is the convention of value that we're placing on it? Because the first time that a player does it, they won't know. They'll probably guess that there's some inherent value to the occasion other than just having fun, because it's going to put them behind in combat in terms of strength. It might even be a way of making it a way of allowing the player to make the game more difficult for themselves, and that's maybe
I
what it could
mean,
signal.
you're thinking of it with like a penalty, or I feel like it should just be like, here's a bit of candy kind of thing.
But
Like,
it should be.
I feel like one of the reasons why you keep finding it like at the like third act of the game is because it enters that version where things start feeling grindy and the game starts feeling more like a Skinner box and less like a device for fun.
We don't have that time though. Like our game is gonna a playthrough is gonna finish in like 12 hours.
Yeah, I mean 12 hours is relative, but yeah,
You know,
I know
like
what you mean.
you're playing through two characters in 12 hours. That's pretty fast. You don't have all that much time to squander on grinding, and in fact, the systems that I was talking about at last meeting are put in place so that you don't have to grind. Like we're gonna
Right,
make the encounters as necessary as possible.
right. That seems like the smart plan. Yeah.
So if we're adding in something that deliberately slows down the pace and lets
Yeah.
you enjoy a moment, then I think the message that we should be sending, if this is a realistic environment, is that you're sacrificing something else. And
Mm.
the direct opposition to moments like those is combat, which is what the player wants to be playing. I mean, I'm not saying that narrative is any more or less necessary. I think it's incredibly necessary as a counterweight to whatever the play system is. There has to be some sort of check on pacing either way. But if we're adding in a narrative moment, then what you're sacrificing is a combat moment. And so
Mm.
then,
Yeah. To me, I just don't see why you like if it's the. I mean, the moments I've always seen are not like long, giant, big things. Like it doesn't feel ever like a sacrifice. I guess we could make
it,
on
it,
one that feels like sacrifice. I don't see any reason why your idea like is invalid exactly, but I don't think it needs to be the only way to do it either.
it doesn't it doesn't have to be, but once you do it once, like let's say we do that in the Cavalier storyline where he goes out and he flies kites with someone, he's
Yeah.
connecting with them, and it's something that encourages you to see the Cavalier in a different way, that you wouldn't ordinarily get if he was just single-mindedly going through the quest line, which is how we've represented the character. Like this is an option for the player to expand the character in a different direction, to make them seem a little bit more selfless than selfish.
Okay.
Then, so how is it going to connect these two ideas?
I don't know.
Okay, so if we're allowing for that, then it seems to me that we should. Oh, okay. It seems to me that the player, if we add some sort of incentive system to the moment on the narrative side, and disincentive on the combat side, will then see that decision in that way anytime they come
Uh,
across it in another storyline.
well, I mean, the I don't know. I feel like people will see it as an exception because they played like through two-thirds of what feels like the game in the first place, and then there's just this one thing that they didn't expect. Like, yeah, I don't know. That's why I said it feels like a pacing thing. Like, and it never seems to happen again in any game that I've ever seen it happen. Like, it's just always this thing like, oh, this game has been like nothing but like core game mechanics for like the last 24 hours or whatever. Maybe we should give like the player at least the briefest
So
moment of like breath.
I don't know if I represented that correctly.
Okay.
Um, let's say that I'm playing through the Cavalier and I come across that moment, and we provide an incentive for you to spend time with an NPC, and it's a
Yeah.
narrative incentive, and we provide a combat disincentive. Then the next time I come across that decision, if there is a decision point with the Lost Rider or the Cabaretto or the Ridsmith, then the player is going to associate that moment with the same thing that happened the last time. And we can use that to subvert player expectation in certain ways, but it's like if I shoot someone in Call of Duty, the cause effect should be that the bullet kills them, right? Like this moment should represent something that gives me a narrative bonus or incentive.
So you wanna represent it as part of a branching or at least narrative design choice as like an actual choice versus just an experience. That's what you're
Yeah,
saying.
yeah, because it is a choice.
I'm seeing that as a treat. that's
But but
that's
it
how I'm seeing it.
but it is a choice though. Like
Yeah, it is a
this is
choice,
a
but I don't know. I don't think every choice should be meaning. Like I think all the
oh
other
there.
choices are meaningful. Like every other choice is meaningful. I mean, why? There's not everything is meaningful in life. I don't know. I don't see why you can't just give someone a little pleasure moment for no reason,
But that's
other than that we're game designers and that we have the opportunity to.
because there's a disconnect there. In a game like Bioshock Infinite, that moment is there to take the combat that you've been doing, and you've been mentioning like you're doing like 24 hours of combat. There needs to be a moment like that to break it up and make it seem special. In fact, there should have been more moments like that in that game.
Mm,
In our game, the pacing is going to fall roughly 50-50 narrative combat, maybe 60-40 combat narrative.
because of our short time spans. What you're
Right.
saying?
Right. It's
Yeah.
a very quick game, or it's going to be very quick for a run through with one character, and then the subsequent expansion storyline is going to be a little bit longer because it's going to take more time to level up, probably, uh, but not that much longer. Um, and so if that's true, if that is true, then and every single other decision that we're having the player come across is one that's important. Like whether it's dialogue where we're kind of trying to get you to make a decision quickly, to whether you're going one route or another to get to a town. If all of those things are important and we put in something that is unimportant, then the player is going to wonder what the significance was. And sure, the counter argument is that the moment has significance in and of itself, and it's a building of the narrative of the character, and the player should acknowledge that. But if it's just one moment in the day of the character, and that's all we're showing people in a fairly condensed experience already, then
Mm,
I feel like the player's going to wonder what effect it had. And if there is no effect, then they're going to be let down.
mm. Okay. Here's my compromise with you. Let's put it on the side for now, and then it's something that we can like easily take in or put out. Do you want? Let's just like leave it for later when we have someone to play the game and see what they think of it. How about that?
Sure. I do feel like
Okay.
it's a fantastic idea. I'd just like to use it.
Okay.
um, okay.
Yeah. But we agree on we like disagree on like an essential like definition of it. I think so. I think, or maybe we could do it where we have two different versions of it and see how they play out.
Right, and I'd
But
rather do that for sure.
yeah, yeah, that shouldn't be too hard either. But yeah,
Um,
okay. Let's just put it on the side table then.
sure.
All right, then I guess that's it. I think we did it. We did it,
Well,
man.
we didn't discuss NPCs all the way through. Do you?
Oh well, I mean, there's a lot to say.
Yeah,
What
there.
do
I
you want to
mean,
talk about?
we've got another 18 minutes, unless you have to go.
Yeah. No, I don't.
Okay.
I mean, what do you want to start with? Like, there's lots of NPC stuff that we've never talked about.
Right, and that's
Yeah.
why I'd like to do it now, or at least some of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So what do we want to talk about now?
um, well, I think that you were saying earlier that it's really hard to get agency out of the mechanics of the game, and I think there's another example of agency that the player has control of that we haven't discussed, or we've discussed very briefly. I'd like to mention it at least.
Okay.
When you're playing through, you will probably get more NPC allies than you can have in combat because the limit is six per side, six players.
Okay.
Um, and if we include NPCs that are not storyline specific, they're location specific. So if I'm in the human territory and I veer into elven territory for whatever reason, I could maybe pick up an NPC there to add to my team. If we're putting that in as a means of slightly expanding how long the game is at the end if you want to continue on with your character, which I think should be a choice for the player. If they've really become attached to something and want to explore the world further as that character, we give them a little bit of extra time, meet people. Or maybe the narrative just takes them through elven territory and they pick up this NPC anyway. If they have seven NPCs and they can only select six of them, and they're bringing these different NPCs to different points in the narrative. And one of those NPCs that they don't choose is an NPC who's been with them since very early on, and that NPC has narrative implications. Then what does that mean if they're not present at combat in one location that's narrative related?
I mean, my instinct is just to make it so they always have six and we don't have to deal with the issue. But if we want to have more than six, then it's something we have to deal with.
I think it's
Um.
probably a good thing to
Yeah.
give players choices over how they craft their party.
I agree too. Um. But yeah, it's an issue.
So I think that that's
I
something that we could
used to.
use to represent player agency. The character that I didn't bring with me, that wasn't there at that location at that specific time, um, did not. Let's say hypothetically that there's a specific character and they're an archer or something, and someone's being hanged. And I'm stealing this directly from Pirates of the Caribbean because it's the only example I can think of right now. And they could shoot
Okay.
the noose off of someone's neck and drop them before that person was executed. You don't have their
Yeah.
abilities. You don't have their skill set. Then that person would die.
Okay.
And maybe that doesn't have any like immediate narrative implication. Maybe it's just a moment like the one you were describing earlier, a moment where the player witnesses something or has an experience, and it doesn't create any feedback, like
It's
any
just something that happens.
right,
Yeah.
any systems feedback, right? But if you had that party member with you, it wouldn't have happened.
Right.
Then you have a sort of kind of you have a semblance of player agency there where certain decisions that you're making are influencing other decisions. I think the only thing that you'd have to be careful about is how much the player can know about something beforehand and craft their party around it.
Yeah. Because I mean, if it's essentially around like their, if each NPC you have is like a certain class and they're known for like making fireballs, and then you present a situation where clearly only fireballs can help, then it seems kind of stupid.
Right, but
I suppose is what it is.
if you're kind of hinting or foreshadowing that something's going to happen for a while and they aren't direct clues or hints, but they do sort of point to the fact that maybe this person should be there and the player doesn't pick up on it, then what we're doing is we're incentivizing players to pay more attention to the narrative.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. Yeah, it's worth thinking about. I think, or at least we're trying to tie in. I don't know, like NPCs are something that I haven't given too much thought into at the moment, just because I'm working totally on our main guy,
Mm-hmm.
our main guy concept. But I think it's a good idea, like in a lot of different ways. It like a it's almost like this third mechanic story almost. I don't know. It's a weird way to describe it, where like it feels like we're putting a story into the way that you design your party, but also there's like there's a it's almost involuntary. Like it's almost there if you discover it.
Yeah. Well,
Maybe it shouldn't be. I don't know, but like it's a weird opportunity. But I guess I should think about it.
the other thing is that um, Dragon Age has a system where your party members can become so pissed off at you that they leave
Yeah,
uh,
I remember that.
because you make decisions that they don't agree with. I think maybe similarly, we could have a system in our game where at each of the branching points, you have characters in your party who are maybe making suggestions. They wouldn't have to necessarily, but you'd know their views from talking with them if you chose
Hmm.
to. Uh, and so, if you make enough of those decisions that go against what they would do in a row, then that party member leaves, and that adds a second level to what we were just discussing, where you don't even have the option of bringing that person in at a specific moment because they're no longer there in your party.
So there's like a character balancing thing.
Yeah, there could be a character
Yeah,
balancing mechanic.
yeah. Cool idea. I don't know. It's like it's the like cast size thing. If we want more than six characters that you're always coming with you, then you're always having like conversations that are like huge. So I feel like maybe there's this. Maybe you could like get it through the menu when you're balancing character stats and all that stuff anyway, or it just like how does this character feel about this situation or
I, I
like
feel I feel
something like that.
I feel like it depends on which character you are, what your roster size is. If you're a character who travels a lot, then you have much more chance of running into a lot more people and recruiting them. Whereas if you're someone like the Lost Rider and your story should all take place in basically one location or in
Yeah.
the towns immediately surrounding one, then your party size would be relatively small. And in that way, we can
Yeah, to me,
also.
the idea makes sense with the Lost Rider. I guess I suppose it's just like it shouldn't be used for every class then. But yeah,
Yeah, and we wouldn't even have to use it with every class. A lot of what these systems will allow us to do is have a lot of levity in how we choose to introduce um, the value of an NPC to a character given their storyline. For a Cavalier, the NPCs don't matter very much, and maybe that's reflected in how frequently these choices come up. Where an NPC who's involved with you could help out or couldn't help out.
yeah,
Maybe that's dictated by your dialogue selection. Whereas someone like the Lost Strider might take the advice of the people in his party very frequently, something like that. I mean, we'd have to see, and it would all depend on the player. But
yeah. No, yeah, I agree. I think thinking as the NPCs as like this class specific option is a good way to frame it.
okay,
Yeah,
that'll also allow us to balance difficulty. Certain classes could be more difficult than others,
right, right.
and the main reason why we have such a large number of NPCs is like, let's say I'm playing as a healer, then I might not have as much direct combat ability as someone like the Lost Strider would, and so I'd need more of a party to support me.
Yeah, I feel like I feel like side quests would be a good way to involve NPCs no matter who you are.
Yes, I agree with that too. Maybe that secondary storyline thing you're something that's NPC related.
Yeah, that feels NPC related, at least in some ways.
Developing their stories in
Uh,
some way. Maybe there are two NPCs who are always in direct opposition, or maybe just sometimes.
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's like a bunch of different things you can do at once. Then, like, my main concern really is just that, or at least maybe for Milo, is that there's going to be more than six characters that he's going to have to think about. But I suppose it's up to him to how he balances to focus on them and who's the most relevant and stuff like that.
I would say that
Is
the
if
Lost.
large casts aren't,
Okay.
huh?
I would say that the Lost Strider's probably got like three townspeople who would actually be fighting with him.
Oh,
I
okay.
mean, you could always mediate the number down. He's someone who's less reliant on NPCs than other classes would be.
I mean, large. It's not like writing for large casts is impossible. It's not. My will can do it. It's just a whole. It's like a whole another thing to deal with,
Mhm.
especially if we involve the system that we just thought about, where like each of their opinions does in some way affect the outcome of the playthrough, then like it becomes like a system he has to balance basically while also writing the characters
Well,
themselves.
okay. I should basically I guess this is a good time to add this. I feel like these systems, while they are giving you choices, are also narrowing down the ways in which you need to make the choices while writing. Like
Oh, so
before, yeah,
you think that it should be a permanent kind of effect, is what you're saying,
kind of. I
where
think I
the
think you can pick and choose which systems you're writing along as like scaffoldings, basically, to
yeah.
to support the narrative. But if you're picking and choosing, then that actually makes your job easier in a way. I mean, it's not ever going to be easy, but certainly if I give you, or if we design together one way in which NPCs can be implemented, and then we design another two ways in which they can be implemented, and we're holding to those ways as being the only ways in which they're implemented, but you can pick between those three systems for however many you want to include or not include, then the solutions to your narrative issues about player agency become much more clear, much more concrete, rather than being sort of abstract. How do I write this? There's almost a template for it, I guess. That's just from.
Suppose.
Go ahead.
You're saying that the agency would come through choosing which NPCs are there. Yeah.
The I'm saying that I'm saying that for any system really, like whether it's travel or combat
Oh,
or NPCs, if we have an array of choices for how you can
interact
integrate,
with them, and
yeah,
we know. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you is like mainly I know that there's probably lots of ways to interact
mm,
through fighting and through that, but I have like no UI to look at, so I
sure,
don't know the specific options that a player would naturally have in the
sure.
situation to begin with.
Uh,
Like I can assume that there's going to be items and stuff like that, but I don't really know in what way one chooses items or anything like that yet.
okay. Well, that's something that we'll have to talk about tonight as well, I suppose. Um,
Okay.
I think the biggest takeaway from this for anyone who's watching later, and I guess the biggest takeaway from me was that the narrative system should probably be compiled into a sort of narrative design bible of sorts. I have a rule book that I have uh, that's been put into place for the combat design that really
Mm.
helps for knowing the speed of abilities and everything else for anyone who's joining in and trying to come up with something. But if you ever expand your writer base, or even if Henry and Maya would just want to look at something, or you want to look at something that's more concrete and tells you absolutely here are the things that we do and do not do, um, that would be incredibly useful. And probably what'll
Yeah.
end up happening is that we'll have to go through and take all of these things that we've been talking about and create sections and categories for them.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, right now we have some stuff like that, but it's not all compiled. We also
Yeah.
have a continuity room that we're like kind of trading developments and letting each other know what's going on, kind of stuff going on. But it would be good to have like a this is permanent list.
Okay. So
Yeah.
let's get on that fairly soon, and that way we can know what we do have and what still needs to be answered.